Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 48 minutes before his entire world collapsed in front of CNN cameras. Megan O'Brien moves through the night shift corridors of Seattle General in San Diego with the kind of precision that comes from having already survived the worst. Her scrubs are crisp. Her movements economical. Her face unreadable beneath the fluorescent lights that hum against polished linoleum like insects trapped in glass. She checks vitals in the ICU with hands that never shake, her fingers brushing past a tarnished challenge coin clipped inside her pocket, the metal worn smooth from 18 years of handling. The coin is the size of a quarter, stamped with an eagle and the words Task Force 121, dated 2006. She touches it sometimes when the fluorescent buzz gets too loud, when the beeping monitors start to sound like something else entirely. A second-year resident named Chen watches her work. He notices the scar tissue visible when her sleeve rides up during a blood draw on Mr. Patterson in room for 12, burn patterns running from wrist to elbow in a pattern too precise, too deliberate to have come from any kitchen accident. The resident says nothing. He has learned not to ask questions about nurses who work the graveyard shift and move through these corridors like they own them. The antiseptic smell mingles with cold coffee from the nurses' station where Megan works alone at 2 a.m., preferring the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. rotation where fewer people are awake, where fewer questions get asked. She charts notes with mechanical efficiency. Patient vitals. Medication times. Nothing personal. Nothing that reveals anything at all. The rain hammers the hospital windows like applause, the sound of San Diego's rare winter storm pressing against the glass. She is on her third week here. 3 weeks of existing in the margins. 3 weeks of being invisible, which is exactly the way she wants it. She was Megan O'Brien before the government erased Master Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien from every database they could find. Before Marja. Before the black site that wasn't supposed to exist. Before she was told to disappear and never surface again. Now she is just a night shift nurse in a hospital where nobody asks about the scars, where nobody asks about the hands that move with terrifying fluid precision, the kind of precision that comes from 17 years of field medicine and combat trauma, not from a nursing school in Sacramento. Her badge reads, Megan O'Brien, RN. Nothing else. Nothing true. At 5:44 a.m., Dr. Whitfield arrives for his early rounds. His Italian loafers click against the tile in a rhythm that sounds like permission, the sound of a man accustomed to being let into rooms without knocking. He is tall in the way wealthy doctors are tall, carrying his height like an inheritance. His smile is practiced, tested on residents and nurses and Medicare patients, refined over 18 years of knowing exactly how far he can push before someone pushes back. His tablet is already glowing with surgical schedules and billing codes, his fingers swiping through the day's cases with the casual confidence of someone who has never been questioned. He rounds on 3 patients in the ICU. Room for 01, 68-year-old post-op hip replacement, bilateral pneumonia suspected. Room for 08, 73-year-old acute subdural hematoma ready for discharge. Room for 12, 51-year-old sepsis case, blood cultures pending. With each patient, Whitfield performs the same ritual, 5 minutes of attention, 2 or 3 sentences of diagnosis, then the gliding smile as he exits. Megan hands him the chart for room for 08 at 5:52 a.m. It is a simple exchange. She extends the chart. He takes it. But at the moment his fingers touch the metal clip, his eyes catch something on the counter behind her, a Medicare billing report left open on the desk, left there because she had been studying it during her 4 a.m. break, trying to understand the pattern she had noticed over the past week. Phantom procedures. That is what the billing codes say. Procedure code 27447, revision of total knee arthroplasty, tagged to Mr. Patterson in room for 12 4 days ago. Except Mr. Patterson has never had surgery. His chart shows no surgical history. No anesthesia records. No post-operative notes. Just a phantom code attached to a 72-year-old Medicare patient, generating a claim for $8,400 that will be submitted to the government in 11 days. She noticed the first one by accident, an extra line in the billing report that didn't match the patient's actual diagnosis. Then she looked at 3 more patients. All elderly. All Medicare. All with phantom codes tagged between their legitimate diagnoses, procedures that never happened, surgeries that never occurred, generating claims that would be buried in a mountain of legitimate paperwork before anyone thought to audit them. Whitfield's eyes move across the open report for 2 seconds. 2 seconds is enough. His smile does not change. His hand does not tremble. But in those 2 seconds, something crystallizes in his expression, a recognition so swift and so complete that Megan feels it move through the air like a pressure change before a storm. He knows that she knows. He knows that she is reading his billing codes. He knows that she has connected something that was not supposed to be connected, that she has noticed something that was supposed to go unnoticed, buried under the normal chaos of Medicare submissions and insurance claims and the 1,000 other things that keep a hospital running. Their eyes meet for 3 seconds. His smile sharpens. "You're looking at something, sweetheart." The word lands like an accusation disguised as familiarity. He has not called her by her name once in 3 weeks. To him, she is the night shift nurse. The quiet one. The one who does not ask questions and does not go to the parties and does not have photographs on her desk or talk about her weekend plans. The one who is so forgettable that he has already forgotten what name she gave when she was hired. Megan's jaw does not clench. Her hands do not shake. She is trained in a discipline that erases those telltale signs, that trained her for 18 years to give nothing away, to let the storm pass over her like she is made of stone. "Patient chart," she says. Her voice is level. "Room for 08. Whitfield takes the chart from the counter. He glances at it, then back at the billing report still open behind her. The report that shows his crimes laid out in line items and procedure codes, in phantom surgeries and ghost procedures that generate thousands of dollars every month. He has no idea that the woman whose silence he mistakes for weakness once held a position for 11 hours in Marja after her entire team was extracted. He has no idea that the quietness in her voice is not fear but operational discipline, the sound of someone who has learned to control every register and frequency of her own speech until it becomes a perfect instrument. He has no idea who he is looking at. He sets the chart down on the counter. His fingers brush against the billing report, and for a moment his hand hovers there, as if considering whether to close it, whether to move it, whether to take any action at all. Then he straightens, and the smile returns. "You should probably focus on nursing, sweetheart," he says. "Not administrative work. That's above your pay grade." It is a warning disguised as advice. It is a threat wrapped in the language of helpfulness. It is the moment when Dr. Whitfield realizes that Megan O'Brien is a problem that needs to be solved, and he begins calculating the angles of how to solve her. He walks away, his loafers clicking against tile. The sound moves down the ICU corridor and disappears around the corner toward radiology. Megan does not move. She does not reach for her phone. She does not call anyone or send emails or take any action that would leave a trace. Instead, she simply closes the billing report and returns it to the filing cabinet where it belongs. She checks the 4 on Mr. Patterson in room for 12. She charts his vitals. She performs her duties with the same economical precision she has performed everything for the past 18 years, doing exactly what is asked, nothing more, nothing less, leaving no fingerprints anywhere at all. But the challenge coin in her pocket seems to grow heavier as the morning shifts toward dawn. The rain continues to hammer the windows. The monitors continue their mechanical rhythm. The fluorescent lights continue their insect-like humming. And somewhere in the hospital, Dr. Whitfield is already making phone calls, already planning the moves that will make Megan O'Brien disappear again, already beginning the work of destroying someone he has no idea he cannot destroy. 3 weeks into her new life as a nurse, Megan understands that her old life is about to catch up with her in ways that have nothing to do with the government and everything to do with a surgeon in Italian loafers who just discovered that his crimes have a witness. The next 48 hours will change everything. The morning shift began like every other morning at Seattle General, fluorescent lights humming their monotonous frequency, the smell of antiseptic and coffee mingling in the ICU hallway, the soft beep of 100 monitors creating white noise that only nurses could hear. Megan had been awake since 5, had showered in water just hot enough to sting, had braided her dark hair back with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory older than her nursing license. 3 weeks in and she'd learned the rhythm of the place. She'd learned which residents asked questions and which ones just nodded. She'd learned where Whitfield took his coffee, black, 6:53 a.m., always from the machine near the east stairwell where the camera had a blind spot. What Whitfield didn't know was that she'd learned something else, the fragility of his criminal empire, written in billing codes that didn't match procedures, in phantom surgeries tagged to Medicare patients who'd never been near an operating room, in spreadsheets that would collapse the moment someone with actual forensic patients decided to look. He decided to move first. Attending rounds at 7:56 a.m. For residents trailing behind Whitfield like remoras behind a shark, their white coats still crisp, their pen still full of hope that hadn't been beaten out of them yet. Megan stood at the nursing station updating the cardiac monitor log when she heard his voice, that particular timbre he reserved for public humiliation, sweet as rat poison. "Sweetheart, could you grab the chart on 412? She didn't look up. Her pen continued its steady rhythm across the logbook. 1, 2, 3 more vital sign entries before she stood, moved to the chart rack, and found the one he wanted. ICU room for 12. 72-year-old male, post-op day 3 from a coronary artery bypass. Stable. Boring. Perfect for whatever Whitfield was staging. She walked the chart to where he stood with his entourage, for residents watching with the careful expressions of people who knew what was about to happen and were powerless to stop it. Whitfield took the chart. Read 3 lines. Then, with the deliberate grace of a conductor, he dropped it at her feet. The impact was soft, just papers hitting linoleum, but the silence that followed was the kind of silence that travels. Heads turned at the nursing station. A med student stopped mid-conversation. The ventilator in 411 seemed to wheeze louder. "Pick that up, sweetheart," Whitfield said, his smile showing all his teeth. "You really should be more careful where you place things." The residents exchanged glances. One of them, the youngest, a kid who couldn't have been more than 26, looked genuinely uncomfortable, his shoulders hunching like he wanted to make himself smaller. Megan's jaw tightened. That was the only thing that moved. Her face remained exactly as it had been, blank as a monitor screen in sleep mode. She bent, collected the scattered pages, reorganized them in chronological order despite the fact that Whitfield had shuffled them deliberately, and handed them back to him. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. When she met his eyes for exactly 1 second, there was nothing in her expression but the absence of emotion, which was somehow worse than anger. Whitfield's smile flickered. Just a moment. Just enough for her to see the frustration there, the realization that whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. She turned and walked back to the nursing station, her stride exactly the same pace it had been before, neither faster nor slower, and resumed the cardiac monitor log without a word. But that wasn't the worst part. 2 hours later, the cafeteria during lunch rush. Megan sat at a table in the corner with a turkey sandwich and black coffee, reading the hospital newsletter on her phone, scanning for any mention of code violations, compliance audits, anything that might signal investigation into the surgical department. The cafeteria was packed. 200 staff members minimum, the kind of crowded chaos where accidents happen, where someone could bump someone and spill everything and it would just be bad luck, just one of those things. Whitfield materialized with his lunch tray, some kind of quinoa situation, a smoothie, a salad that looked like it cost more than her hourly wage. "Excuse me, sweetheart." He was moving past her table when his arm caught her plate. Not hard. Not obviously. Just a brush that sent her sandwich sliding, her coffee cascading across the white laminate table like dark water, fruit cup tumbling and scattering grapes across her lap, soaking into her scrubs. "Oh, my goodness," Whitfield said to the room, his voice full of concern that sounded real to anyone who wasn't listening closely. "You really should be more careful. These things happen." The sound of it was what got people, the casualness, the rehearsed surprise, the way he said it loud enough for 50 people to hear. Several of them laughed. A genuine laugh, the kind that comes from watching someone else's humiliation, from the relief of not being the target. Megan sat completely still. Coffee dripped from the table edge. 1 drop. 2 drops. The grapes lay scattered like small green accusations. Her scrubs were soaked. She could feel the cool dampness spreading across her thigh, could smell the coffee, could feel the microscopic moment where her nervous system wanted to respond, to flush, to stand, to say something sharp. She overrode it. Her hands lay flat on the table. She looked at Whitfield for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stood, grabbed a handful of napkins from the dispenser, and walked to the bathroom without a word. Not fast. Not slow. Not angry. Just gone. Behind her, she heard one of the residents say something under his breath. The response was another resident laughing, uncomfortable but laughing, because that's what happened when the hierarchy was being reinforced. You laughed. You participated. You kept your mouth shut. The bathroom was empty. Megan locked the stall, stripped off her soaked scrubs, and let the water run over them in the sink. Cold water. The stain would set if she used hot. She'd learned that years ago, in a different context, in a place where you learn things like how to remove blood from fabric and how to move through a room without making a sound and how to control your breathing when your body wanted to scream. The challenge coin was in her pocket. She could feel its weight against her hip. She didn't touch it. By the time she returned to the floor in a spare set of scrubs from the call room, fitted a little loose, but clean, the story had already spread. That was what Whitfield was counting on. Not the actual humiliation, but the narrative of it. The cafeteria crowd. The drop tray. The sweetheart. The narrative that said she was careless, that said she couldn't handle the pressure, that said she belonged somewhere else. At 1:15 p.m., at the medication dispensary, Megan was counting the narcotics for the shift change when she overheard them. Betting pool in the doctor's lounge, one of the surgical nurses was saying, her voice low but not low enough. Whitfield's got money down that she quits by Friday. How much? The other nurse asked. 500 pot. He's betting she doesn't make it through the week. Megan's pen continued its steady movement across the inventory sheet. Column 1, drug name. Column 2, count. Column 3, witness signature. Her handwriting remained perfect. Precise. Unchanged. She didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge that she'd heard. Didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing that information land anywhere other than in the same neutral space where she stored everything else. But it had landed. $500. Whitfield. For residents she'd never spoken to. The charge nurse maybe. Whoever else Whitfield had recruited into his little psychology experiment, this process of systematic pressure designed to make her crack, to make her quit, to make her disappear before she could connect the dots between phantom billing codes and a surgeon who smiled like he'd never violated a single regulation. At 6 p.m., the supply closet. Megan was restocking for kits when the door closed behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could identify people by the way they moved through space, that particular heaviness of someone used to being obeyed. I've been watching you watch things that aren't your concern, Whitfield said quietly. His voice was different now. No performance. No public charm. Just the sound of a man whose temporary advantage had made him careless enough to be honest. Megan continued placing for kits on the shelf. 2 18-gauge angiocath needles per kit. Hospital protocol. Her movements didn't accelerate or slow. Nurses who forget their place tend to make career-ending mistakes around here, Whitfield continued. I'd hate to see you become one of them, sweetheart. She turned to face him. The supply closet was small, maybe 8 by 10, walls lined with boxes and bags, the fluorescent light overhead casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white. Whitfield stood between her and the door, but that wasn't what she was thinking about. She was thinking about the way he positioned himself, feet shoulder-width apart, confident, like a man who'd never encountered actual resistance. She was thinking about the fact that his threat had been theatrical, which meant he was already losing control. "Excuse me," she said, her voice exactly level, exactly neutral. She stepped toward the door. Whitfield didn't move immediately, just a fraction of a second of hesitation, the moment where he'd expected her to comply, to defer, to respond to the authority in his voice. By the time he stepped aside, she was already past him. She closed the door behind her and kept walking, her hand steady, her breathing controlled, her face showing nothing at all. What Whitfield didn't understand was that she'd lived with far worse than his threats, that she'd been trained in environments where actual lethality was the constant conversation, where showing fear meant not coming home. But he was about to find out. The general arrived at Seattle General at 2:07 p.m. on a Tuesday, transported by a military escort team in a convoy of unmarked sedans that made the ER staff stop moving for 3 full seconds. His name was on the admission paperwork as General Marcus Webb, Special Forces Command, blind in both eyes from shrapnel and trauma at the cellular level, his cardiovascular system held together by medications and the kind of will that doesn't break because breaking stopped being an option years ago. The ICU charge nurse, Sandra, briefed the available physicians at 2:15 p.m. 5 minutes later, Dr. Chen declined the case. "Liability concerns," he said, glancing at the military escort still posted outside the general's door. "Poor prognosis for vision recovery," he added, which was true but not his real reason. The real reason was that he didn't want to be the doctor who failed a decorated officer. By 2:33 p.m., Dr. Patel had declined. Then Dr. Morrison at 3:12 p.m. Dr. Kumar at 3:33 p.m. and Dr. Whitfield at 3:51 p.m., his refusal delivered with the particular coldness of a man protecting something far more valuable than his medical reputation. 5 physicians, same afternoon, same excuse layered with different words. The general would need continuous cardiac monitoring, medication management, psychiatric evaluation for PTSD, pain control, and none of them wanted to be responsible when those interventions couldn't restore what war had taken. Megan was processing blood labs at the ICU station when Sandra approached her at 4:15 p.m., a folder held against her chest like armor. The night shift was Megan's assignment, but Sandra needed someone willing to assess the general before the evening transition, needed someone to at least read his chart and establish baseline vitals. Sandra's voice carried the weight of a question wrapped in a request. Megan looked up from the laptop. She didn't ask about the 5 refusals. She didn't ask about liability or prognosis. She said, "I'll take him," and the relief that flooded Sandra's face was so immediate and pure that it felt like watching someone set down a stone they'd been carrying for hours. Megan walked to the general's room at 4:32 p.m., her scrubs freshly pressed, her hands already moving through the mental checklist of what a blind, traumatized, newly admitted patient would need. The general was reclined in the ICU bed, the ventilator humming its mechanical rhythm beside him, his chest rising and falling in synchronization with the machine's breath. Megan began her assessment with standard protocol, blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, temperature probe, her movements methodical and efficient. And then she saw the tattoo on his left forearm, running from wrist to elbow, a single name inked in military font, M. The Brian. Muscle memory took over. Her hands didn't pause. Her breathing didn't shift. She continued the vitals check as if the room hadn't suddenly tilted, as if the name tattooed on a dead man, because the Pentagon had told him she died in a black site 2 months after extraction, hadn't just appeared on the forearm of the one person she'd spent 18 years trying not to think about. The tattoo was dated 2014, Marja. The operation where she'd held a defensive position for 11 hours after her entire team was extracted, carrying him out last through 200 meters of open ground while rounds tore through her ribs and her left shoulder and the soft tissue of her upper thigh. The scar tissue under her left breast still ached when storms rolled in. The general's eyes were closed, his face slack with sedation. She could have walked away. She could have told Sandra that the case was too complex, that 5 other physicians had already made the logical choice. Instead, Megan pulled the chair close to the bedside and began the work that would occupy the next 8 hours. She checked the medication drip rates, each one a small precision, his fentanyl dose adjusted for his weight and pain response, his sedative tiered to keep him calm without masking emergent symptoms, his cardiac medications positioned to stabilize the electrical irregularities that showed up on the monitor as erratic lines. She spoke to him in a voice she deliberately softened, dropping her register and slowing her cadence, modulating her speech patterns beyond recognition. The timbre she'd trained in SEAL Team 3 selection course, the voice that could cut through rotor wash and gunfire, was gone, replaced by something gentler, someone the general wouldn't associate with the woman whose hands had dragged him across that open ground. She said, "I'm your nurse for the evening, General. I'm going to check your 4 sites now," and the general turned his head toward the sound, his sightless eyes moving in her direction with the automatic response of someone whose hearing had become his primary navigation. His hand reached for where her voice had come from. She allowed him to find her wrist, let his fingers settle there for a moment, feeling the pulse beneath her skin. He seemed to understand that she was real, that another person was present, and then his hand relaxed and fell back to the mattress. At 6:08 p.m., Megan had completed her first full nursing assessment and documented everything in the digital record. She'd established a baseline, set the monitor alarms at appropriate thresholds, and positioned him on his left side to optimize lung capacity. The general's breathing had slowed. His oxygen saturation was holding at 94%. The cardiac monitor showed a more regular rhythm than it had when he'd arrived. Megan was preparing her supply cart for the evening when she heard Whitfield's voice in the corridor, calling for Sandra. She didn't move toward the conversation. She finished organizing the tubing, the syringes, the battery of medication she'd need for the night. But she listened to the tone, caught the particular sharpness when Whitfield said, "That nurse needs to be reassigned. Megan O'Brien. Now." Whitfield's office door closed at 8:03 p.m. Sandra didn't come to remove Megan from the case. Instead, she appeared at the ICU station at 8:14 p.m. and said quietly, "He wanted you gone. I told him we're short-staffed and you're the only one who said yes to the general." Megan nodded. She didn't thank Sandra. She didn't express relief or concern. She simply returned her attention to the monitor banks, watching the general's vital signs scroll across the screen in small green numbers. By 9:15 p.m., Whitfield had made his first call. Megan didn't hear it, but she saw the ripple effect when Sandra received a message from Hospital Administrator Kevin Bryce requesting a meeting about the general's care team by morning. The message was CC'd to board member Patricia Dunmore. Dunmore, who funded the surgical wing renovations and expected consideration in return. Megan continued her hourly monitoring, reading the monitor strips, palpating the 4 sites, documenting vital signs in the electronic medical record with the precision of someone recording evidence. At 10:43 p.m., she noticed the changes to the standing orders in the system. Her eye scanned the modification timestamps, 10:22 p.m., 10:31 p.m., 10:38 p.m., 3 separate alterations reducing her monitoring frequency from every hour to every 4 hours and changing the sedation protocol in ways that would increase the general's cardiovascular stress. The changes were made under an administrative override code. Whitfield's administrative override code. Megan didn't report the changes. She didn't escalate to Sandra or the charge physician. She simply continued hourly monitoring anyway, establishing a parallel documentation file she kept separate from the official record, a detailed log of vitals, medication responses, and monitor strips written in her personal notes that no administrator could retroactively alter. The pain was information. Pain was data. And the data in this case was that someone was trying to degrade the general's care. At 11:56 p.m., Whitfield sent an email to Kevin Bryce, board members Patricia Dunmore and Thomas Hargrove, and hospital legal counsel Sarah Reeves. Megan would see a copy of it eventually, would read his language about inappropriate attachment, practicing beyond scope, and insubordination. But at 11:36 p.m., she was checking the general's pupils with a penlight, ensuring his neurological baseline remained stable, and she was thinking about Marja and how she'd learned to move without being heard, without drawing attention, without giving anyone the satisfaction of knowing she was afraid. The general's breathing remained steady. His oxygen saturation was 95%. His heart rate had stabilized at 84 beats per minute. Megan documented each reading, each parameter, each small confirmation that he was stable, that he was going to survive this night, that she could do this thing she hadn't allowed herself to imagine, being this close to him, being the person keeping him alive without him ever knowing who she was. At 2:04 a.m., the general's heart monitor exploded into a rhythm that wasn't rhythm at all, a chaotic wail that split the ICU silence like a siren. Megan was at the medication cart when she heard it, and she moved before her conscious mind caught up, her body already running through the door of his room while nurses scrambled and the on-call resident, a third-year named Chen who had trained for this exact moment 600 times, froze completely in the doorway, his hand shaking as he reached for his phone. The general's blood pressure was dropping in real time on the monitor. 78/42. Falling. His skin had gone the color of wet concrete. Blood pooling inside his own pericardial sac, fluid crushing the heart like a fist closing around an organ that needed room to beat. Cardiac tamponade. The word hung in the room like a guillotine blade. Chen's fingers fumbled with his phone. I need to call the attending, he's 20 minutes out, maybe 30 with traffic. His voice cracked. The attending was the only cardiologist on call. The attending was asleep somewhere in the physician's lounge. The attending would not arrive in time for a man whose heart was being strangled by its own fluid accumulation. Megan stepped beside him and her voice dropped into a register she hadn't used in 3 years. Not the careful nurse voice. Not the deferential one Whitfield had beaten into her over 3 weeks. This was the voice that had commanded a squad under fire in Marja when the radio went dead and 17 Marines were bleeding and she was the only functioning officer in the ruins of a compound. Get me a spinal needle kit. 25 gauge. Get me ultrasound gel, a portable ultrasound machine, and we'll both crash carts to this room. Do it now. Chen stared at her. She didn't wait for him to move. She was already pulling on sterile gloves, her hands moving with the terrible fluid precision of someone who had done this in a field hospital with artillery echoing outside the walls. I said now, petty officer. Something in that voice, something in the way she'd called him petty officer, something in her absolute certainty, broke through his paralysis. He ran. She heard his footsteps hammering down the corridor, heard him shouting for supplies, heard the ultrasound machine being wheeled at a run. The general's breathing was shallow. His oxygen saturation had dropped to 88%. At this rate, he had maybe 4 minutes before his blood pressure collapsed completely, before his heart simply stopped trying. Megan prepped his chest with antiseptic swabs, the iodine smell cutting through the room like copper and rust. She positioned the ultrasound probe with her left hand, watching the screen flicker to life, and there it was, the pericardial fluid surrounding his heart like a dark cloud, like a fist made of water, like the visual representation of death arriving slowly. She didn't hesitate. She didn't breathe. She advanced the spinal needle with her right hand, using real-time ultrasound guidance the way she'd been trained by a Navy trauma surgeon in a tent in Kandahar 8 years ago, the needle sliding through skin and muscle and pericardium until it touched fluid. She withdrew 120 milliliters of bloody fluid in 90 seconds. It was like opening a valve. The general's pressure responded immediately, 85/45, then 92/48, then stable at 98/55. His heart rate normalized from 142 down to 108. His oxygen saturation climbed, 88, 91, 94, 97%. The monitor stopped screaming. The ICU went quiet except for the soft wheeze of the ventilator, the tick of the 4 pump, the normal rhythm of a heartbeat that had been seconds away from stopping forever. Megan labeled the specimen, documented the procedure with clinical precision, time, volume, appearance of fluid, response, and then she looked at Chen. He was standing 3 feet behind her, his mouth open, his hand still shaking. "Where did you learn to do that?" His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She was already documenting the general's new vitals, already checking his pupils, already doing the 1,000 small checks that meant he was alive because she had moved when everyone else had frozen. By 6 a.m., while the general slept under sedation and his heart beat steadily inside his chest, Dr. Whitfield made for more calls from his office. The first was to Harrison Wells, a board member who had received a $15,000 donation from Whitfield 3 years ago for his daughter's political campaign. The second was to Margaret Soto, who had hired her own nurse from Whitfield's preferred staffing agency at a discount rate he'd arranged. The third was to Thomas Price, who owed Whitfield a favor that went back 7 years and a malpractice settlement that had been quietly dismissed. By the fourth call, he had framed the overnight emergency pericardiocentesis as reckless endangerment by an unqualified nurse performing surgery without authorization, performing a procedure that only a cardiologist should attempt, practicing beyond her scope of license in a way that endangered the patient even though the patient had lived. The formal disciplinary hearing was scheduled for noon. Megan showed up at 8 a.m. for her shift not knowing that Whitfield had already moved to eliminate her. She was checking the general's morning labs when security arrived, 2 officers she didn't recognize, walking toward her with the apologetic shuffle of people following orders they didn't want to follow. Megan O'Brien, one of them said, "We need you to come with us." She stood. She didn't ask questions. She had learned in 17 years of service that compliance in the face of authority was often smarter than resistance, even when the authority was corrupt. The officers walked her to her locker while nurses watched and whispered, while Whitfield appeared in the window of his office on the 2nd floor and watched her with arms crossed and a smile that was almost a victory lap. Her badge was deactivated mid-walk. Her credentials shut off. Her access erased in real time as she gathered her things. Everything she owned at the hospital fit into a cardboard box, a jacket, an extra pair of scrubs, a coffee mug, a phone charger, a photo of the unit in Kandahar that she kept in the bottom of her locker where no one could see it. At 1 p.m., she carried that box through the main lobby of Seattle General in front of day shift nurses and residents and visitors and a news crew covering a different story entirely, and not one of them knew they were watching a decorated war hero get eliminated by a man who was afraid of her. At 3 a.m. the next morning, Megan sat alone in an all-night diner on Harbor Drive called The Beacon, which was ironic because she felt like every light in her life had just been extinguished. A cup of coffee sat in front of her going cold and developing a skin on the surface. The window was dark, the parking lot empty, the city sleeping the deep sleep that only comes at that hour when night has won and morning hasn't yet started fighting back. She stared at her reflection in the glass, a woman with no badge, no credentials, no job, no future in medicine because no hospital would hire a nurse who'd been terminated for practicing beyond scope. Her fingers turned the tarnished military challenge coin over and over in her pocket. Click, click, click. The sound was barely a whisper. The coin was from her SEAL team years, from a commander she'd served under in 2016, and it was the only physical piece of her old life she'd kept, the only thing that proved she had been real, that she had served, that she had been something more than a woman getting fired from a job she'd held for 3 weeks. The metal was warm from her hand and worn smooth from 8 years of fingertips, and as she watched her reflection stare back at her, she wondered if disappearing forever was the only way to stay disappeared, if the government's original order, that phantom was dead, that Master Chief O'Brien had been erased from every database, hadn't actually been a mercy disguised as punishment. She thought about the general sleeping 2 miles away in a hospital bed, his heart beating steady inside his chest because she had moved when everyone else froze. She thought about 5 doctors refusing his case, about Whitfield's fear of her, about the way her hands had known exactly what to do even though she'd spent 3 years trying to pretend she was someone she wasn't. She thought about the challenge coin and what it meant and what it might cost her to ever use it again. The coffee had gone completely cold. The diner had closed down by 4 a.m. and the waitress, a woman maybe 5 years older than Megan, with the hard eyes of someone who'd worked nights her whole life, had finally stopped asking if she wanted anything else. By 5 a.m., Megan was the only customer left. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a mechanical prayer. Rain had started outside, drumming against the windows with the rhythm of impatient fingers. She watched the parking lot fill with water and reflect the neon signs, and for the first time in 8 years, she let herself feel the full weight of what she'd lost, the respect, the structure, the meaning. The chance to be seen. She pulled the challenge coin out and set it on the table in front of her. In the diner's light, you could see the engravings worn almost invisible by time, the SEAL team insignia, the year 2016, and on the back, 3 initials, MOB Master Chief O'Brien. The name of a ghost. The name of someone who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. For days later, a man would arrive at Seattle General in federal custody, and that coin would start its journey back into the world. The federal intake officer wheeled the prisoner into Seattle General's East Corridor at 2:08 p.m. on a Thursday. Shrapnel wounds. Afghan custody, transferred through 3 military channels, finally processed into civilian holding. Nobody on the floor recognized him. Nobody was supposed to. The wounds would heal in 6 weeks. The scars would last forever. He was processed as patient 4891, no distinguishing features noted except the hollow stare of a man who'd survived things that were supposed to kill him. The nurse rotation chart hung on the ICU wall the same way it always did, laminated, updated weekly, photographs printed from the hospital directory. 12 nurses. Names, shifts, credentials. The man in the federal custody wheelchair rolled past it twice before the recognition hit. The photograph in the second row, 3rd position. Megan O'Brien, RN. Night shift. The eyes in that photo were the same eyes that had stared into his across 200 meters of open ground in Marja. The same hands that had bound his wounds with her own blood soaking through her sleeve. He stared at the photograph for 6 seconds. Then he leaned toward the federal marshal and whispered a single word that made the marshal's spine straighten: Phantom. The word hung in the corridor like a detonation. Phantom wasn't a name anymore. Phantom was a ghost story. Phantom was classified at 17 levels. Phantom was supposed to be dead in a black site prison outside the reach of human law. The marshal immediately stepped away, radioed someone, and moved the prisoner to an isolation room pending additional administrative review. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. The prisoner never moved his eyes from that photograph on the wall. By 3:15 p.m., Torres, the Navy veteran security guard who'd been hired 6 months prior, was standing in front of that same rotation chart. He'd served 14 years. He knew what a classified call sign looked like on a face. He'd seen the news footage from Marja, all of it redacted, all of it censored, all of it stamped with black markers that said what no one was allowed to read. When the federal marshal asked him to confirm the prisoner's statement, Torres stepped closer to the photograph. He read the name. His hand moved to his chest without thinking. He looked at the marshal. He looked at the photograph again. Then he turned toward the hallway where 12 other staff members were already gathering, and his voice carried down the corridor like a rifle report: that nurse is Master Chief Petty Officer O'Brien. The silence was so complete you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Staff froze. A resident dropped a clipboard. A nurse turned to another nurse with her mouth opening. The words had been spoken in the ICU, in public, in front of 40 witnesses who'd never heard that rank attached to the timid night shift nurse who'd been fired 4 days earlier. The rumor spread like contagion, across the ICU, through the break room, down the stairwells, into the attending lounge where Dr. Chen was reviewing charts. Master Chief. Petty Officer. Navy. That nurse. That person. The same woman Whitfield had called sweetheart and watched security escort out of the building. The general heard the commotion from his bed. He heard the whispers. He heard Torres's voice still echoing in the hallway. He reached for his service tablet, the one he demanded 3 weeks prior, the encrypted device that had been delivered by courier and locked in his bedside drawer. His fingers moved across the screen with the precision of someone accessing classified databases that shouldn't exist outside of Pentagon servers. He pulled records. Names. Dates. Operation names redacted except the location, Marja. Operation timeframe, 2009 to 2012. Personnel designation, Phantom. Clearance level so high the tablet's screen dimmed reflexively, protecting data from external view. His blind eyes couldn't read the words, but his hands knew the sequences. Voice command. Read file. Full designation. The tablet spoke in the artificial voice programmed for exactly this situation, Master Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien. Service designation, Phantom. Silver Star. Bronze Star. Bronze Star. Navy Cross. Major Operations, Helmand Province, November 2009 through March 2012. Primary Specialty, Combat Medicine and Tactical Extraction. Classification Level, SEAL Team 3, Special Warfare Operator, Female. Commendation, held position Objective Sidewinder for 11 hours following full team extraction. Last known location before classified reassignment. The general's hand trembled. Not from fear. From recognition. From the weight of a lie he'd been told. He raised his voice, his composure fracturing like ice under boots. Read it. All of it. Every citation. The tablet continued. The words filled the room. Other patients heard it. Nurses stopped moving. The general sat up in his bed, his sightless eyes fixed on a point in space where she should be standing. Silver Star for valor. Bronze Star for heroism. Bronze Star for meritorious service. Navy Cross. Navy Cross, you understand? Do you understand what that means? His voice cracked. Just once. She got that, putting herself between an enemy position and... He stopped. His hands went flat on the bed. 11 hours. Alone. While her entire team was extracted. She carried me out last. 3 bullets. Her arm. Her left shoulder. Her ribs. I watched her take 3 rounds and keep moving, and I was told she died. They told me she died in a black site prison 2 months later. They told me Phantom was dead. The room didn't respond. The machines beeped. The ventilator cycled. Everything else was silence. The general stood. Not slowly. With the sudden explosive movement of someone who'd spent 18 years in control and just realized the control was a lie. His full line went taut and he didn't care. His bare feet hit the cold tile floor. His hand found the wall, and then it found the direction of the doorway where she stood frozen, watching him stand, watching him recognize her. He turned his head toward the sound of her breathing. Toward the shape of her silence. I never got to thank you, he said. His voice was steady now. Commanded. I never knew you survived. I never knew they put you here. I never knew any of it until this moment, and I can't see your face, and I'm about to do something that breaks every protocol, but I'm doing it anyway because that's what officers do when they meet warriors. He dropped to one knee. Not bent. Not knelt politely. Dropped, like a man surrendering to gravity and honor simultaneously. His right hand moved to his chest. His blind eyes faced her frozen figure in the doorway. The room stayed absolutely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Thank you for my life, he said. Master Chief. And that was when the rotor wash hit the helipad 3 stories above them. The sound came through the walls, that deep rhythmic thunder that means authority is arriving. SEAL Team Command doesn't send personnel by ambulance. They arrive by aircraft. The rotors wound down at 4:15 p.m. Boots hit the hospital roof at 4:18 p.m. By 4:25 p.m., a man in dress blues was walking through the ICU with 6 armed personnel moving in perfect formation behind him. Commanding Officer of Naval Special Warfare. His rank visible on his collar. His presence moving through the corridor like a pressure system, the air literally seemed to change density as he passed. His boots clicked on the tile floor. 1 step. 2 steps. 3. The sound of operational authority made manifest. He bypassed hospital administration entirely and walked directly into the ICU where the general was still kneeling and Megan still stood in the doorway, her composure intact but her hands hanging at her sides like she was still deciding whether to salute or disappear. The company's eyes locked on her face for approximately 3 seconds. Then he nodded once, the smallest movement, The kind of acknowledgement that military personnel understand means everything. He turned toward hospital administrator Kevin Bryce, who'd appeared in the hallway with an expression like a man watching his career implode in real time. "We need a private location. Now." 5 minutes later, the CO was sitting across from Whitfield in the administrator's office with 2 JG officers flanking him. The door was closed, but the hallway could hear everything. The company's voice was measured, controlled, and had the quality of someone explaining something that shouldn't need explaining. Master Chief O'Brien was placed at this facility under deep cover following classified operations. Her credentials are genuine and carry DoD security classifications you don't have the clearance to question. Her presence here is protected under federal witness security protocols. Whitfield opened his mouth. He'd spent for days believing he'd won. For days believing Megan was gone for good. Her medical actions exceeded her scope. The pericardiocentesis. Master Chief O'Brien is a certified special operations medic with trauma surgery qualifications that exceed most of your attending physicians, the CO said. Not loud. Quiet. Which made it worse. She's held a certification in emergency surgical intervention since 2008. What she did was well within her actual scope of practice. Your problem isn't that she violated protocol. Your problem is you didn't know who she was. Whitfield's face started to redden. He opened his mouth again. The CO continued before sound came out. "We've reviewed your emails. Your phone logs. The altered standing orders you placed on General Morrison's chart. We've notified the State Medical Board and federal investigators regarding the Medicare billing anomalies our Master Chief flagged for weeks ago. You have approximately 2 hours before federal marshals arrive with a warrant." The hospital corridor heard that part clearly. By 5 p.m., CNN had received an anonymous tip about a decorated Navy Master Chief being terminated from a civilian facility. By 5:48 p.m., a camera crew was setting up in the main lobby. By 6 p.m., federal investigators were sealing Whitfield's office with 2 armed personnel standing guard. The Medicare fraud investigation had expanded, phantom procedures totaling $2.3 million in fraudulent charges across 18 months. Not theoretical. Documented. Criminal. The kind of number that destroys careers. At 6:45 p.m., the CO walked into the main hospital lobby where staff, patients, and CNN cameras had gathered. He walked toward the center of the marble floor. His dress uniform was immaculate. His presence commanded the space the way generals' presences always do. The air pressure changed. He saw Whitfield standing near the main entrance, still believing there was an escape route, still believing his network meant something. The company's voice echoed off the marble walls. "Dr. Whitfield is hereby terminated for obstruction of a decorated Master Chief Petty Officer's necessary cover assignment and for interference with a protected federal witness. Security will escort you from the building immediately." The words landed like ordnance. The room froze. Whitfield's face went from red to purple to the color of something dying. His mouth opened and closed without sound. The cameras captured all of it. Every moment. Every angle. His cardboard box was packed by security at 7:15 p.m. He was escorted from the building at 7:13 p.m. while CNN filmed his exit. The federal investigation expanded over the following week. Board members resigned, Whitfield's medical license entered emergency suspension, and his name appeared in every hospital ethics course in the country as the cautionary tale of a physician who committed crimes while believing his institutional power meant immunity. 6 months later, Megan stood on a naval special warfare platform in dress blues, her chest bearing the medals she'd finally been cleared to display. Silver Star. 2 Bronze Stars. Navy Cross. The ribbons were visible to 300 service members attending the ceremony. The general stood beside her in his own dress uniform, his vision partially restored through experimental surgery that Megan had helped coordinate during his recovery. When the CO read her citations aloud, the general's voice added its own words. "Master Chief O'Brien saved my life twice. Once in Marja when she refused to leave me behind. Once in that hospital when she refused to let me die despite losing everything to do it. The audience stood in ovation. In a separate timeline shown in brief scenes, Whitfield taught CPR at a community college in Oregon for minimum wage. His license remained suspended. His name appeared in textbooks as a cautionary tale. Torres had been promoted to hospital safety director. The 5 doctors who'd refused the general's case each sent formal letters, for apologizing, one requesting consultation. Megan visited the general monthly. Their relationship was now an open friendship between operator and officer. In the final scene, Megan trained new Navy corpsmen at a special operations medical facility, her voice calm and steady as she demonstrated the pericardiocentesis procedure that had saved a general's life and exposed her own. A young corpsman asked how she'd stayed so calm under pressure in that civilian hospital. Megan touched the challenge coin now hanging on a chain around her neck. "The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together," she said. The screen faded on her composed, steady face. Finally visible. Finally recognized. Finally home. Thank you for watching. If you resonated with Megan's story, please subscribe to see more tales of hidden warriors, quiet heroism, and the extraordinary people doing extraordinary things when no one's watching. Like this video if you believe in second chances and the power of speaking truth. Comment below, have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you really were? We read every single comment.